Hello and welcome to Tech Deals. Do you want a CPU with incredible performance and built-in graphics but don't have a lot of money to spend? Do you want to play games such as Fortnite, Overwatch, Grand Theft Auto 5, and even The Division 2? Do you only want to spend $50? You've come to the right place. This is the Athlon 3000G 2-core, 4-thread, 3.5 gigahertz CPU with VEGA 3 integrated graphics running at 1.1 gigahertz, $49. Unlocked and overclockable unlike its predecessors, and rest assured we'll be overclocking it today and showing you just how far we can push the CPU. I recently did a video of the predecessor of the 3000G, the 200GE, the 220GE, and the 240GE. Those were a little bit slower than this and actually cost more, so you're getting more performance for less money. Let's be absolutely clear here. The real deal remains the Ryzen 3 and Ryzen 5 APUs you can see here. A Ryzen 3 3200G has 4 true processing cores and VEGA 8 graphics, which is more than double the graphics performance of the VEGA 3 and the 3000G APU. It's also only $35 more expensive when I'm recording this video. If you can remotely swing the $35, then it's totally worth it. Of course, if you're not in the United States and these prices are different wherever you live, then adjust according to your local currency. If the price difference is much larger, the 3000G starts to make sense. But in the US at least, spend the $35 and get a 3200G instead. The Athlons exist for those who are either extremely budget focused or, as I mentioned before, not in the United States and the prices are different. They exist for people who primarily need an office machine, email machine, and just either casually play games, Minecraft, that sort of thing, or who are building 100 office computers, and 100 times 35 is actually real money. And so if you fit into one of those categories, the Athlon might be right for you. For everybody else, there's Ryzen. In today's video, we're going to have split benchmarks. First, I'm going to show you stock performance on this APU, what it's really capable of. Then we're going to overclock this thing. It actually overclocked quite well. And then I'm going to show you some productivity benchmarks, which I did not show you in the predecessor. This time, I am going to show you a couple, 7-zip Cinebench Blender, which took a long time to run, etc. And I'll have a few thoughts to say in between each set of benchmarks. Our test bench today is the Asus ROG Strix X470-F motherboard with 16 gigabytes of DDR4 3200 MHz CL16 RAM. However, the RAM was actually run at 3000, not 3200. Despite my best efforts in the BIOS with XMP turned on and all the timing set properly, this CPU would not boot on this very nice motherboard with 3200 MHz RAM. I did turn XMP on to get all the tight timings and everything set, and then I just manually set the speed of the RAM from 3200 down to 3000 in order to get it to work. If you buy 3200 and find it doesn't work, you can turn XMP on and then just adjust the speed. All my other Ryzen CPUs, including these, ran 3200 just fine on this board, so it's just the memory controller of the Athlon. For cooling today, we are using the very nice premium Mugen 5 6 heat pipe direct contact 120mm cooler, which is way monstrous overkill for the little APU that could, but it's what's on my test bench, and so that's what I use. The standard cooler that you get is this adorable little box cooler, which does the job, but it's going to be a bit louder and be a bit hotter than this nice aftermarket cooler. Step up to the Ryzen 3 3200G and you get this very nice Wraith Stealth cooler, which, as you can see here, is much larger and beefier than the small box cooler that comes with the Athlon. You can see the size of the fan here. It is cooler and quieter with thicker and larger metal area. The $35 not only gets you a better CPU, but it gets you a better cooler as well. Spend a few dollars more on the 3400G and you get the Wraith Spire cooler. See how much larger that is right there? It's taller and thicker with actually quite a bit more metal in it. No copper bottom like the previous generation standalone CPUs, but still a much nicer cooler. Some of you may have noticed this adorable little mini computer sitting over here during this video. This is an ASRock A300, $149. Includes case, motherboard, and power supply. It accepts an Athlon or Ryzen APU, has 2 RAM slots, 2 M.2 slots, 2 2.5-inch drive bays, Intel AC Wi-Fi included, USB 3.1 Type A and Type C ports. It's actually an impressive little computer. Now, it's getting a separate video and a full review, but it was sent to me along with this APU, and so I wanted to have it on the desk and mention. I'll link it in the video description below. If you need a computer for a parent or grandparent or kid, an office, or a media PC, if you need something small and you don't need to add a graphics card in the future, that's actually reasonably priced for $149, considering what a tower power supply and motherboard costs. MSI Afterburner was used for the real-time performance numbers and benchmarks that you're about to see in the upcoming tests. The video footage itself was recorded on an external computer on a hardware capture card. This test bench didn't even know it was being recorded, so no performance loss for capturing the video. Links to everything on the desk here will be to Amazon, Newegg, and eBay down in the video description below. Those are affiliate links. They do support the channel at no extra cost to you. If you like this content and you want more of it, please consider supporting us. Use those when shopping. It's greatly appreciated. You can also directly support the channel on Patreon and Floatplane. Patrons get early access to my filming scripts, which I am working off of right here, and they get early access to the benchmark charts before the videos are published. If you want to see all of the benchmark charts in image format, consider joining down on Patreon below. Floatplane subscribers get the entire video early. What you're watching right here was published early over on Floatplane. So if you've got a couple bucks a month and you like our content and can afford to support us, please check those out below. Now let's take a look at our first benchmarks running at stock speed on the CPU and GPU. First up, we have Counter-Strike Global Offensive. Frankly, a game that I think is perfect for this sort of CPU. While maybe not for a super competitive gamer, if you just want to play it and have fun, get online with friends and have a good time, it's not too demanding. And if you look at the real-time performance, for a 1080p low detail, that's pretty respectable. Now, if you really do want higher frame rates, set it to 720p and you'll get a decent boost because that is half of the resolution, so you're only rendering 1 million pixels instead of the 2 million here, but I think the performance is pretty good for a casual player. 62 frames per second average, 36.1% low, 27.1% low. If you are a casual player, if you just play this for fun, this is absolutely all the performance you need. Rocket League is another game that feels just absolutely made for these APUs. It's attractive, it's nice, it's competitive, it's fun, it's popular, it's not very expensive anymore. Yes, that's a DeLorean, your eyes don't deceive you. And the performance is remarkably good. Now, we are running in performance mode. They don't really have low, medium, and high in this game. What they have is very high quality, performance, high performance. I set all the sliders to performance, so most of the bells and whistles are disabled. But for being in a relatively low graphic mode with a lot of the checkboxes disabled, this looks remarkably good. I mean, your eyes don't deceive you. It is what it is, and I think, frankly, it looks very nice. Yes, I know I'm not very good at the game. So, how well does it perform? 77 frames per second average, 61.1% low, 43.1% low. Wow! Unless you are uber professional player, that is all anyone needs to just have some fun and play games like this. 99% of the time, we were at 61 frames per second or higher. If you're on a 1080p 60 Hz monitor, turn on VSync, it'll be smooth and butter performance for like 99% of you out there. What great performance. Star Wars Battlefront 2. I have not tested this in a while, and the last time I did, I tested it in space battles. But I thought, you know what, we're going to try ground battles because they're far more demanding. Look at all the stuff going on the screen. The trees, the explosions, I'm in the thick of it. Again, I'm not an expert at it, but I stayed engaged, and the total recording time of this benchmark was 16 minutes and 51 seconds. So the numbers, the benchmark result at the end is fairly reasonable for such a large playthrough. But watch the real-time performance. It's great to say all that. But what I really want you to do is to look at the GPU usage up at the top, which is actually bouncing off of 100% at times. And then I want you to look at the CPU usage and notice that we are using all of the CPU. A Ryzen 3 3200G would be so much better here, it's not even funny. 4 real cores, because we are not only using both cores, but we're deep into the hyper-threading. So 4 real cores would help. VEGA 8 graphics would help. A higher clock speed would help. But it's actually remarkably... Oh, this is pretty cool. Excuse me, yes, coming through. Goodbye. Am I going to get him? Oh, shot him down. Sweet. Okay. Here's the thing. I played through this entire battle. I played all the way to the end, and win or lose, it was fun and controllable. It would be nice to have better performance. It would be nice to have a little bit higher frame rate. But if you just want to play games like Star Wars Battlefront 2, the fact that it's playable, even if it's not 60 frames per second, is a testament to what a $50 CPU will get you in 2019. 51 frames per second average, it was remarkably playable. Now, the 1% low of 17 and the 0.1% low of 7 were very real. There were absolutely frame skips and some frame drops in there. There were certainly a couple of places where performance was not great. There was at least once that I died to one of the Jedi because I simply just didn't have enough control over my... Well, that, and I'm not very good at it. I wouldn't want to be a super competitive player here, but it wasn't bad. Disclaimer, look at the top of the screen. 1080p, low detail, 50% render resolution. So keep that in mind. In order to get these performance numbers, that resolution was actually internally dialed all the way down. World of Tanks, 1080p, low detail. This actually looks better at low detail than this game looked a few years ago at high detail. The recent engine change and the HD graphics upgrade really gave this game a graphical boost. And yeah, you could totally play at this setting. You don't need max detail to play this. Oh, am I gonna get him? Sweet! I gotta oh, they ricocheted. 400 damage shot off of me too. How about I just hide behind this, shall I? Check out the real-time performance. The CPU is being fully utilized, although it's not using the hyperthreads very much. The graphics is actually not being fully utilized because at 1080p low, our 2-core 4-thread chip is actually somewhat of a limitation in order to get full utilization. Maybe an overclock of the CPU would help? Well, we'll get to the overclock stuff here in just a minute. But all things considered, not bad. 84 frames per second average, 43 1%, 30% 0.1%. If you play World of Tanks, 1080p low on a $50 APU, it absolutely runs just fine. It's not 60 frames per second all the time, but unless you are a top-tier, uber-competitive player, there is nothing wrong with this performance whatsoever. World of Warships, everybody's favorite shooty boat game. This is demanding to both the graphics chip and the CPU. While we are getting basically 100% usage out of the graphics, notice that CPU there? It's trying to go above 2 cores. This game actually effectively utilizes 3 cores and occasionally 4, or at least a 4th for background tasks. But it doesn't utilize hyperthreading all that well. Again, a Ryzen 3 3200G would be a better choice here. On the other hand, we are at 1080p, low detail, and we're doing just fine at 60 plus frames per second. So again, there are tons of games that you can play at 1080p resolution on a $50 CPU. 68 frames per second average, 47.1% low, 41.1% low. I played the whole battle through. Very nice performance. You know, if you avoid the Assassin's Creed Odyssey and Shadow of the Tomb Raiders of the world, it's amazing how much you can get away with $50 these days. That brings us to Overwatch, and this time it's split screen because I'm showing you the difference between 75% render resolution and 50% render resolution. Both are 1080p low detail, absolutely identical settings all the way across the board. The only difference is 75 versus 50% render resolution. Now, does it make a visual quality difference? It does. It's not a huge one, but it is there, and if you watch them back to back and switch between them, then yeah, you can notice little bits and details. On the other hand, take a look at the performance difference. Holy smokes, that's a difference. Notice that with the faster frame rate, we have more CPU usage. Faster frame rates require more CPU, and that's a concept that I've covered, but for some reason seems to be something that I keep having to mention because I keep seeing people go, well, don't you need a better graphics card for that? The higher the frame rate, You both need a better graphics card and a faster CPU. They kind of go up together. The more you buy of one, the more you have to buy of another. So yeah, we've got much better frame rates there, and we're definitely using all 4 of the threads with 50% render resolution, whereas it's much easier when we're down in the 40s and 50s on 75%. So just to give you a bit of a taste of it, this is full screen 75% render resolution. I'll leave this up for about 10 or 15 seconds so that you can see without having the split screen what 75% looks like. It actually looks really good. Even in low detail, this is both A, amazingly playable, and B, quite beautiful at 1080p versus the 720p that I used in the 240GE review. This is 50% render resolution, and if you look really closely, well, depending upon what resolution on YouTube you're watching it on, you'll notice that the textures aren't as sharp, the detail's not as sharp. Basically, the whole thing is just a bit blurrier. But if you've got a $50 APU and you want to play at 1080p, here you go. Now, 720p, 100% render resolution is playable, but would not be this fast of a frame rate. It is worth noting, different battles, different situations, different maps, different areas are going to produce a different level of performance. That being said, it's not going to be that different. 89 frames per second average at 50% render versus 45 at 75%. 64 and 35 at 1% low, and then the 0.1% low is wonky, so don't worry about that. Find a detail setting and a resolution or a render resolution that works for you. If you are on budget hardware, you can make almost any game play if you're willing to play around with the detail settings enough. This is a solid CPU for $50. That was some very respectable performance for such a budget-oriented processor. Now it's time for some overclocking benchmarks. First of all, the stock speeds on this, again, are 3.5 gigahertz on the 2-core 4-thread CPU and 1.1 gigahertz on the VEGA 3 integrated graphics. But both are unlocked and overclockable. You can either use the AMD Ryzen Master software in Windows to do it, or you can do it directly in the BIOS. I actually did try it both ways and ended up just going with the BIOS, but you can do it in the software in Windows if you want. I had no difficulty running the CPU at 4.0 gigahertz on both cores and getting the integrated graphics to run at 1.5 gigahertz. That's not a huge increase on the CPU side, but it's a monster increase from a percentage point of view on the graphics side, so we should see a nice improvement in graphics performance and thus frame rates at 1.5 gigahertz. I did not adjust the voltage on either the CPU or the graphics in the BIOS. I left them on auto. Now the motherboard does boost those a bit, and so the voltage is running higher and the power requirement is a bit higher, but it's not too bad. But if you really want to push it to the limit, you might need a better cooler than this. Of course, if you're thinking about buying a separate cooler, why not just buy the Ryzen 3 3200G instead, which would make a lot more sense, but that's neither here nor there. In any case, on with the overclock benchmarks. Our first overclocked result is going to be in Grand Theft Auto 5. Stock is on the left-hand side of the screen and overclocked is on the right. I'm doing side-by-side here rather than over-under like for Overwatch because I discovered when I did over-under, you could never see the car that I was driving and it looked kind of funny, so I changed it around and made it side-by-side. You can see up at the top of the screen the VEGA 3 graphics are running at 1.1 gigahertz on the left because that's stock performance and 1.5 gigahertz on the right. And the CPU on the left is at stock at 3.5 gigahertz and 4 gigahertz on the right. Now, does it make a huge, monstrous, amazing difference? Well, it depends. It helps, and over the course of 15 to 20 minutes of benchmark run, it does add up over time. It just depends upon, obviously, what you're doing. I'm not testing in-game benchmarks here, I'm doing live gameplay. That was a wicked jump on the right. By the way, if y'all are interested, a full version of the overclocked run is over on the Rogue Tech Gaming channel. That video runs like 15 minutes long, so if you want to see much more footage from this, go check out that video over on the Rogue Tech Gaming channel, linked down in the description below. That was a wicked jump and an explosion at the bottom, by the way. Excuse me, I need your car. I actually narrate some of it and have some fun with it and do some goofy talk. There's a lot of background inside info behind the video editing process and the changes we've made recently to that, so if you're interested, go check that out down below. 58 frames per second average on the stock clock speeds versus 69 frames per second on the overclock speeds. It's not a world-changing difference, but going from 58 to 69 is a substantial improvement. And if you have one of these, then sure, overclock it. Next up, we have the Division 2. This is running at 1080p, low detail, 50% render resolution. I did try it at 720p, and it actually performs much nicer at 720p, especially at 50% render resolution, but the quality is so bad, it literally gave me a headache. I tried it, I played it for about 5 minutes, and finally turned it off and said, no, I can't do 720p, 50% render. I mean, you end up looking at like 360p quality. It truly was atrocious. Now, what's interesting about these two tests is that I was doing basically the same thing in both of them. The time of day and the lighting's a bit different, but I was assaulting an enemy control point in both of them. So the type of battle with multiple spawning enemies and a lot going on, it's actually a very similar, very fair benchmark. The type of battle and the type of events going on, of all the types of live gameplay comparisons I've done, this is one of the best in terms of being absolutely fair, being the same type of battle in the same open air environment against the same type of enemies. So I'm happy with that. In terms of stock versus overclock performance, well, you can see the real-time numbers on the screen. The overclocked really does make a difference. CPU usage itself doesn't change all that much, certainly. An extra 500 megahertz of clock speed never hurts. But I think the real change is in the VEGA 3 graphics. Going from 1100 to 1500 megahertz on that. Notice we're basically pegged on the graphics on both of them anyway. I mean, not totally. There's a couple of times it comes off as the CPU becomes the limit. The truth is, two cores, 4 threads for the Division 2 is really, I mean, it works, but ouch. 30 frames per second on stock speeds versus 40 frames per second overclocked. That's actually a substantial improvement. I have to say, while it wasn't great at stock speed, it was remarkably playable both ways. Just, there's a lot of hitches and a lot of stutter in the game, and it's not as easy to play than when it's running at 60 frames per second. The controls aren't as responsive, but it is playable. And so if you really, really, really want to play the Division 2 and all you've got is $50, it does work and it is playable, if not awesome. That was a very solid performance gain for like 5 minutes of overclocking. Seriously, I did not spend hours and hours tweaking it. It went to 4 gigahertz and 1.5 on the graphics fairly easily. However, disclaimer time, I have a premium aftermarket cooler here, and on the extreme levels of overclocking, you can't expect the stock box cooler to always do as well. I also have a premium $200 motherboard here, and if you're running on a budget $50 board with a stock cooler, overclocking results will vary. You may or may not get this level. Just keep in mind, stock performance is what AMD guarantees. So how well does this APU perform in non-gaming benchmarks? Great question, glad you asked. I have just a few for you here because, well, first of all, it takes forever to run them on such a slow CPU, but also because it's not really a productivity-based chip. If you're seriously wanting to run Blender, which I did, then you're gonna buy something faster than this. But I wanted to include the numbers to give you some idea of what to expect. 7-zip is a file compression decompression utility that is generally fairly well multi-threaded, and as you can see here, I've provided comparisons to 2 other AMD CPUs, the venerable but now old FX 8350 and the Ryzen 7 1700X. Now the Ryzen 7 1700X is a first generation Zen core, and on a per core basis, it's in theory slower than the Athlon 3000G, but it's pretty close. The FX is way slower on a per-core basis, but you can now find them fairly inexpensively. As much as I like the Athlon 3000G, if multi-threaded productivity workloads are what you're interested in, it makes no sense whatsoever because you can buy a used FX 8300 for like $50. You can probably buy a motherboard, CPU, and RAM for $100 if you hunt around a bit. And if multi-thread is all you care about, that's a much better choice than a new Athlon 3000G is. Where the FX falls completely apart is in single core performance. 201 versus 341 versus 363 on the 1700X. So if single core performance remotely matters to you, if you're using this as a general consumer Windows desktop, the Athlon will feel much snappier and more responsive across the board. It just obviously doesn't have 8 cores like the FX does. The reason I included a Ryzen 7 1700X, you can buy them used for about $100 these days. Maybe 110, maybe 120, depending upon when you're looking at this video, when you're looking on eBay. But if you go on eBay, and I'll put a link down below, if you can get one of those for $100, it needs a graphics card, no built-in graphics, you may find yourself with some monstrous multi-threaded performance and the same single-threaded performance as the 3000G. I like to include CPU Z-Bench as a reality check to Cinebench. Cinebench tends to favor AMD chips, and it's kind of a specific workload. CPU Z is just another single-core and multi-thread workload, and what this tells us is that the results from Cinebench were pretty close. Moving on to a real-world rendering workload, Blender. It took 1 hour and 18 minutes to run on the 3000G, 1 hour and 1 minute to run on the FX 8350, and 22 minutes to run on the Ryzen 7 1700X. For all of the, quote, multi-threaded performance of an FX-based CPU, in Cinebench it looks great, but in Blender it falls apart because you have DDR3 RAM and PCI Express 2, and you're missing a ton of features, and frankly, it's a very old platform. If true real-world multi-threaded workloads are sort of what you're looking for, allow me to present to you the Ryzen 7 1700X as an extreme budget option. The Athlon makes no sense if Blender or anything serious multi-threaded is in your workload. Thank you all so much for watching that very long video and review of the 3000G Athlon from AMD. If you watched the entire thing without fast forwarding, 2 gold stars for you. It's greatly appreciated. So in conclusion, the AMD Athlon 3000G is the little APU that could, for $49, 2 cores, 4 threads, really decent integrated graphics, an included stock cooler that is good enough for what the chip is. It's an outstanding value considered on its own. However, if the word gaming comes out of your mouth even occasionally, allow me to point you to the Ryzen APUs, which really are all-around superior choices. If you can afford the relatively minor additional amount of money over here, it's just a much better experience overall. Like this video if you like it, share it with your friends if you love it. Remember to subscribe to my channel with the big huge red button directly below. Questions, comments, thoughts, feedback, suggestions, you know where the comment section is down there. Links in the video description both to all of these products as well as to Patreon and Floatplane to support the channel if you are able. My social media links, including Twitter and Discord, are down there as well. Thank you all so much for watching. I will see all of you next time.